Welcome to the Brehl Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas Brehl. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be starting the first ever installment of Brehl Brief, a weekly recurring segment, in which I will be summarizing and providing commentary on the week's news. And today, we will be welcoming a special guest, Professor David Leventhal of the BALA program, which is an acronym for Business and Liberal Arts Program at Queen's College, and who is also the host of Forward Nation Radio, a progressive political podcast, which I used to be part of. But let's start with the news. Let's start with our first segment, Brehl Brief. Now, first off, today we had to say goodbye to conservative commentator Charles Krauthammer. Mr. Krauthammer and I definitely did not agree on everything, but he was a principled conservative and he was against Trump, which seems like a superficial reason to like him. But when you look at what has been happening this week, let alone the past couple of years under this administration, it becomes clear that we need to stand by those who, in an ideal world, we would disagree with most of the time. So, Mr. Krauthammer, you were well-spoken and fun to watch, and you will be missed. Rest in peace. On a higher note, emphasis on high, Canada just legalized recreational marijuana. Now, other than the fact that Ricky from the Trailer Park Boys will not get arrested as much anymore, this is a good thing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that this measure will make it more difficult for the black market that would normally be selling the pot to operate, and that it will allow the Canadian government to regulate the product more. So this is bad news for the drug cartels, and bad, frankly, for the pharmaceutical industry, because now people won't have to resort to opioids or alcohol to get a buzz. Now, I understand that the health effects of smoking marijuana need to be researched further, but we all know that marijuana is by far not as dangerous as heroin or cocaine, and that it is definitely not as addictive as alcohol. Some politicians criticize the legalization of marijuana because they say it's a gateway drug. They say we shouldn't be sending mixed messages to kids saying don't do drugs, but this drug's okay, you can do marijuana. Frankly, I think the real mixed message is the false equivalency between pot and heroin. We need to be honest with kids and say, by taking pot, you may be putting your long-term health at risk. But if you do heroin, there's a very good chance you will die a very unpleasant death, and you will go through hell. That is for certain. Now, next, I want to cover something that didn't actually happen this week. It actually happened 12 days ago, but it's still something that's very important, and that's the end of net neutrality. Net neutrality just went out the window. Net neutrality is, or was, the law in place that prohibited internet providers from arbitrarily speeding up or slowing down web content. In other words, if you were to put content out on the web, like I am doing right now, if you were to put out content on the web, it wouldn't matter if you said something critical of the internet, wouldn't matter, I should say, if you said something critical of the internet provider that you were currently using, or if you paid that provider more. Your content would load at the same speed as everyone else's. American journalist A.J. Liebling said, "Freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own one." Well, with the reversal of net neutrality, plenty of people just got their presses taken away, or at least partially. I understand that we want a free market, and that past efforts of societies to control every aspect of the market, to make it fair and limit exploitation like Karl Marx wanted, I understand that those societies ended up becoming tyrannical and that their governments became corrupt, so corrupt that human rights and freedoms were repressed at a very high rate. I understand that we cannot resort to communism, that we cannot control every aspect of our market. But the internet providers have such an upper hand in this case. The industry is so heavily monopolized, and they have such an upper hand that I think in this case it is safe to say to them that they cannot express blatant favoritism of certain websites over others. They cannot simply boost content if you pay more, or if you pay them higher rates, or if they believe that your content is more favorable to them. The internet service provider industry is so heavily monopolized, as I said before, and customers have so few companies to choose from that we either need regulations to police how these companies behave, or we need to break the companies up. and we basically haven't been enforcing our antitrust laws. So net neutrality, which was an Obama-era regulation, like many regulations that the Trump administration has undone, net neutrality is basically all we have to lean on. This isn't the first thing this administration has done, as I mentioned. In the very beginning of his administration, Trump signed away an Obama-era rule preventing internet companies from selling your browsing data without your permission. A GOP congressman responded to the criticism of this measure by saying, well, nobody's got to use the internet, a remark that is not even worthy of a response. Hopefully, these actions of the Trump administration can be a lever for the Democrat, the Independent, or the Republican challenger in the race for 2020. The only bright side I see of this is that it is used as political leverage and a way for Trump to lose. Now, we'll move on to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided on 3 major decisions this week. Possibly more, but we're going to cover 3. And of those 3, 2 of them were actually ended up quite good. One of them was a little meh, it could have been a better decision, but it wasn't a death sentence. And with help, we can do more. But I'll start with the 2 good decisions first. First of all, in 1992, the Supreme Court basically said that if you were an online retailer like Amazon, you could not be taxed by that sales taxes did not apply to people who are buying your products. The Supreme Court basically classified online retail as interstate commerce, which would fall naturally under federal jurisdiction because of the Constitution. But the Supreme Court reversed that decision today, and I believe it was today. It was very recently, and they basically said, no, that's not going to work. This case that the Supreme Court just decided paved the way for states to begin applying sales taxes to online products. And while this may be bad for people who shop online a lot, this is a good thing overall. Now, we might debate whether we should try to keep the more local businesses that aren't Amazon. There is a debate as to whether we should try to keep those open for the sake of preserving jobs. But I think we can all agree that Amazon should not prosper simply because the law favors them. The playing field should be level. If we're going to apply sales tax to products that are sold by businesses that actually employ people, we should apply the sales tax to products that are sold on Amazon, who does employ people, but let's face it, not as many as the regular businesses that operate. So this was a good decision. Another decision that was, I would say, a victory was that the Supreme Court said that the government and law enforcement agencies need to have a warrant to access your cell phone data. I think we all know that all of us has launched a program, and when the prompt came up asking, do you give this program permission to access your location, we all say yes, because if we didn't say yes, we wouldn't be able to access the program, and everybody uses these programs. However, what one man did not think of was the fact that when he handed away his personal data to these companies, he actually handed law enforcement over that data too, because there was this man who was suspected of robbery. I believe the police found him guilty of that. I believe that he actually was found guilty of robbery. It was very apparent that he was a robber. And the reason the police knew that was from looking at his cell phone data. They didn't need a warrant to get the cell phone data because technically it wasn't his anymore. He handed it over to his cell phone provider. And because it wasn't his, the police didn't need his permission to get it. All they needed to do was go to the cell phone provider and get that data. Well, This particular instance made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you need a warrant. And I'm very happy about this because while technically the data didn't belong to the man, I'm glad that the Supreme Court followed the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. I believe this is not what the founders would have wanted. I mean, I believe that the founders would not have wanted the police to have the ability to search this man's cell phone data. The founders were living in a different time when you could not hand over so much information with such ease. And as a result, I'm glad that the court looked at this in the proper context and that they decided on this case in such a way that rights and freedoms would be protected. And the third case I want to talk about is the one in which the Supreme Court decided on gerrymandering. Or rather, it was a lack of a decision, I would say. The Supreme Court threw the gerrymandering case back to the lower courts. So in a sense, it was kind of it wasn't a win-win or a win-lose. It was more of a meh. So what we need to do to make sure that this decision goes the right way is we need to make sure that we take back the Senate in 2018 so that Trump cannot continue filling the lower courts, the federal courts, with incompetent judges, with judges who are unqualified to do their jobs, and judges with hyper-conservative viewpoints. Judges that would decide that corporations are people, judges who would decide that a gay couple could be refused service because your religious views say that it's okay to be a bigot. Judges like that, we cannot have judges like that being forced through the system. We need to take back the Senate in 2018 and end this. Now I want to move on to what everyone's been talking about this week, the Trump administration's immigration policy. The Trump administration has instituted a brutal policy that punishes innocent children for the crimes their parents have committed, the crime of trying to escape economic depression and gang violence in their home countries, and the crime of seeking asylum, which is actually perfectly legal, yet in the eyes of this administration, somehow a crime that warrants punishment by separation of families. Let's listen to what the Secretary of Homeland Security, Christian Nielsen, had to say about this.
Let's be honest. There are some who would like us to look the other way when dealing with families at the border and not enforce the law passed by Congress, including, unfortunately, some members of Congress. Past administrations may have done so, but we will not. We do not have the luxury of pretending that all individuals coming to this country as a family unit are in fact a family. We have to do our job. We will not apologize for doing for our job. We have sworn to do this job. This administration has a simple message. If you cross the border illegally, we will prosecute you.
So, what did she say exactly? She said, we will not apologize for doing our job. We have sworn to do our job. So what she basically said is, don't blame me. I'm just following orders. It's the same excuse that Nazi soldiers during the Nuremberg trials used. Let's face it, everyone who is involved in this has blood on their hands. Christian Nielsen, if you don't believe that this job is moral, then you have an obligation to quit your job. This does not, the fact that this, to say that you were doing your job does not absolve you from responsibility of what you're doing. As a matter of fact, it makes what you're doing more horrific. So, quit your job, but don't cry innocence here. Our swindler-in-chief sent out a tweet blaming the Democrats for what is going on. He's saying, oh look, all the Democrats have to do is work with me to get my wall, and I'll let these children go. See, it's their fault. It's not my fault, even though it is my policy. It's their fault. Let's be clear with what he's doing here. He's using these poor children as a bargaining chip to get his wall. Now, I understand that we need more control at the border. We need to reduce illegal immigration, and we can debate whether that is through enforcing the border or allowing more legal immigrants to come into the country. But what Trump is demanding is not feasible. It would cost too much money, it would be devastating for the environment, and what was the third thing? And it's just unrealistic. And the means he is using to achieve this demand are morally reprehensible. He is separating families to get what he wants. And frankly, let's face it, isn't Mexico supposed to be paying for the wall anyway? Let's not forget that. But the cherry on top of the pile of nonsense was Jeff Sessions quoting scripture to justify these heinous actions. Dylan, do we have a clip of that? Yep. All right, we don't have a clip of that, but I'm sure everyone is familiar with this. If you look at the footage, by the way, you could see that he is twitching with laughter because he knows that what he's saying is so blatantly nonsensical. Basically said we should be quoting. He basically quoted scripture. What he said was that Paul, in his epistle to the Romans, said that we should follow the law because God has ordained it for his purposes. Well, first of all, we should not be consulting the Bible when it comes to making our laws. But let's look further at this from a biblical standpoint. I could name loads of Bible verses that would invalidate this policy. I'd also mention that St. Paul broke the law when it went against his conscience, and he paid the price of martyrdom for it. We have an obligation to break unjust laws, as Martin Luther King said, but more importantly, I would mention that this isn't even a law. I repeat, there is no law mandating family separation at the border. We do need to protect our borders and enforce our illegal immigration laws, but what we are doing now should not be considered an enforcement mechanism, mainly because it's immoral. You don't have to believe in open borders to know that it is immoral to separate children from their families. And on a more practical note, this is illegal. Separating children from their families violates international law. I oppose these measures as a Christian, but most importantly, as a human being. Thankfully, we are doing a good bit to combat this. The name David Hogg may ring a bell. He is the Parkland shooting survivor who went after Laura Ingraham, specifically her advertisers, after she went after him for not getting into a few colleges. And once again, yeah, Republicans are certainly the mature party. After going after her advertisers, she apologized for what she said to him. Well, now he tweeted out her sponsors once more after she compared the conditions of the housing facilities these children are in to summer camps. I don't have the sponsors with me right now, I apologize, but we will be sharing them later. So be sure to go to the Brehl Politics website, which is brehlpolitics.blogspot.com, and check it out. You can also look in the description of this video below. Laura, maybe you should go to some of these so-called summer camps. I hear they even have games, like who can go the longest without hugging their sibling? The loser gets deported. What else are we doing? Well, we are shaming those responsible for these actions. I mentioned Christian Nielsen before. Well, the same woman who refused to apologize for quote-unquote doing her job was chased out of a restaurant while having dinner with someone. A Mexican restaurant, of all places. People were yelling shame to her, and eventually she was overwhelmed enough that she had to leave. The religious community is also taking action. Catholic bishops, for example, are considering the possibility of excommunicating ICE agents who participate in this horrific scandal. I've seen friends of mine starting fundraisers through Facebook. In fact, one of them started one for her birthday. I have already given a donation to her fundraiser, and to another one of my friends' fundraisers, and I encourage all of you to do the same. You can click the link in the description once we've updated it and contact your senators to stop this. Some bottom line is that this policy will permanently damage the minds of thousands of young children. I know that Trump has signed an executive order to supposedly stop this, but let's be clear. It is simply a distraction from people who are opposing this. The order only protects against family separation for 20 days, and it does not end the cruel conditions of the detention facilities where sexual abuse is rampant, as well as physical abuse. So, Mr. Trump, I thank you for signing this order, but you got to do better. We all have to do better. The president doesn't just get to say, oh, well, you know what? My bad. Let me put this on hold. He's trying to distract us. We cannot divert our attention. We have to continue calling our representatives. We have to continue shaming these people because that is evidently the only thing that works. But anyway, oh, and I have one more thing to say. The damage has already been done. The kids who have been separated from their parents have already experienced permanent trauma. All we can do at this point is reduce what is going on. We have to do that. And this would not be happening if Hillary Clinton were president. But anyway, I can't believe I'm saying this. Let's move on to a lighter topic. North Korea. The summit happened about a week and a half ago, and in the aftermath of it...
Are we close to seeing... Are we close to seeing Mr. Kim here at the White House?
Could happen. I mean,
they talked about that yesterday.
I would have him. Yeah, I think it's something that could happen. Yeah. Hey, he's the head of a country, and I mean, he's the strong head. Mm-hmm. Don't let anyone think anything different. Right. He speaks, and his people sit up at attention. I want my people to do the same.
Are we close to seeing...
He said, his people stand at attention, and I want my people to do the same. You know, when he said that Obama was the founder of ISIS, I mean, he wasn't president back then. But when he said that President Obama was the founder of ISIS, he said, I think 2 days later, that he was being sarcastic. But with this man, who knows? He wasn't joking when he equivocated the people who were protesting Nazis to the Nazis. He wasn't equivocating when he said there was evil on both sides and that there were good people on both sides. Because, you know, good people, they tend to march with the Nazis. This guy sounds more like a dictator each month, each day, each minute. Well, I shouldn't say each minute, but each day that goes by, I would say. And we have to assume that he's not joking, because this man was not joking when he ran for president, and so we have to assume that he's not joking when he says he wants to mandate that we all sit at attention. Well, he didn't actually say that, but come on. We've seen it. We've witnessed his ego. And last but not least, a recent poll showed that Republicans have a greater approval rating of Kim Jong-un than Nancy Pelosi. You know, after the Islamic terrorist attack on those cartoonists in Paris occurred, Jon Stewart said that here in America, we have our disagreements. We have our, the two political parties have their disagreements, but in the end, we all want to share the same values of freedom and equality, that we're all Americans, and that we all are essentially good people. And while I can't definitively say that Republicans, that those in the Senate are bad people, while I can't judge them, I have to kind of disagree with Jon Stewart in saying that we're all on the same page. When Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, has a lower approval rating than Kim Jong-un, a communist, and a guy that has murdered God knows how many people, we have a problem. And we need to fix it. So that's it for the news this week. we'll be moving on to our next segment, in which I'll be talking to Professor David Leventhal about the relationship between advertising and politics. Stay with us.